Hello, my name's James Patterson, and thanks very much for joining me. I'm going to briefly talk you through two courses that are coming up. One is preparing for an EQA, and one is the QAR Assessor Course. So one of them is a one-day course, which basically gets you ready for being assessed for a QAR or EQA, external quality assessment or quality assessment review. And we basically go through in the course of a day what the fundamentals are of an external quality assessment, being proactive or reactive, and also what you need to do to prepare. There's a fine line here between too much and too little. What we also discuss in that course is what the problem areas can be, often areas that people underestimate, and the vital importance of managing stakeholders through the external quality assessment process, both the assessor that you're going to have and audit committee and senior management. The other thing that we do is help you think about who you're going to choose to do your external quality assessment. With regard to the assessor course, this is 2 days and it's effectively wrapped around the one-day course. And what I talk you through, and this will help you get a qualification based on material coming from the IAA in the United States, is understand what's the kind of minimum level that you need to be at in order to do an effective external quality assessment. And what are the really essential areas that are needed in terms of evidence gathering to make sure that you've done a proper external assessment. Also, one of the things that I'm going to emphasize, and I've done external quality assessments myself, is the importance that you don't just have somebody who picks individual issues and makes a big deal of relatively small things and isn't able to, as I say, join up the dots. And obviously in the course, I explain this more. This is important for your assessment to be adding value, but it's also important for the person on the receiving end of the assessment. And then one of the key things that we talk about in the assessor course is distinguishing between the IA standards, which are one thing, and how to do robust best practice benchmarking. And also the IAA standards have fully conforms and partially conforms and doesn't conform. And one of the most important things for an external assessor, one of the things that the IAA course emphasizes, is how do you make sure you understand how to assess the gray areas. So as you know, if you're watching this and you're already interested in the quality assessment process, there is obviously a whole load of stuff that you can do before you get an external quality assessment. And one of the things that I talk through is, should you think seriously about a preparedness review that really gets you ready properly for an external quality assessment before effectively it's too late and things get reported to the audit committee or senior management. My general advice is that you should do a preparedness review a year or two before your full external quality assessment. And that's something I personally do with heads of internal audit all over Europe. And then I talk about the requirements for an EQA or a QAR and basically explain the different types of assessment that can be done and all the various choices that there are. It's very easy to hear from people, oh, well, there's one way of doing it. There's actually a lot of flexibility in the way the IA have structured this. And I talk you through how that will work, both in terms of the breadth of areas covered and the depth of evidence that the assessor might go for. And then I've got loads and loads of war stories. I help you think about who you actually going to choose to be your assessor. And I might be able to, well, I will be able to give you some warning signs of an assessor that might take credit for things that actually you deserve credit for. It's an obvious point, but just to pick a few key issues from the one-day course and then a brief issue from the two-day course. You know, you might be watching this thinking, I'm sure we're okay, I don't need to do anything. And all I can say, based on many years now of working as an external quality assessor, if you would deal with an external quality assessment on a reactive basis, typically you might end up wishing that you'd done more work in advance. When I do courses, and I'll talk about this more, I explain and people talk about the fact that they've seen heads of audit changing as a result of external quality assessments, or even their internal audit department being outsourced. Now, I'm not here to scare you, but it just highlights this is an area to take very seriously. Vital is going to be to do a self-assessment, but if your self-assessment is quite positive, my message to you will be many audit teams think they're better than they actually are. And that may surprise you, but it's true. They give themselves the benefit of the doubt on certain issues. And that's based on the fact that they're not seeing what other people are doing and don't really understand how assessors will follow the letter of the standards in many cases. I talk about what's really going to matter. I've seen people spending a lot of time and effort looking at some aspects of their work papers, for example, and missing the right amount of work in other areas. An obvious one will be the competence of the audit team in relation to specific audits. And the other thing I think people find very useful is to talk about what positive things you hope to get out of the external quality assessment. And sometimes people don't think about that. And for example, that could be things like support to do more recruitment in certain skill areas. It could also be support to do an assurance map. And we discuss a range of those issues in the webinar. Classic problems that people get into, as I touched upon, is spend a huge amount of time looking at work papers and the follow-up process. And what is vital is to realize that the IAA standards do not accept that as the basis for an EQA or a QAR. What the IAA standards are looking for is a very, very broad review of all IAA standards, going from the whole setup and charter of the audit team, to the plan, to the competence of the internal audit team, to the whole way that communication takes place with key stakeholders, things like thematic analysis, metrics, root cause analysis, etc. So that's a key point. Very often, for example, if you've got a quality team, they might be spending a lot of time on the work papers, but not really heavily involved in other areas. The other key issue to think about is to what level do you want your external quality assessment to be done? Now, the requirement is that the assessment is done against the IAA standards, and the last one time that was updated was 2017. But there have been, for example, in the UK, a number of updated standards, so codes of practice. And obviously you'll be aware, and I'm very interested in this myself, the whole lean agile area, analytics, issues around involvement in acquisitions and projects, and also internal audit as a tool for staff development and moving into other roles. And it's really, really important when you're thinking about an external quality assessment, what benchmarks do you want the internal audit to be measured against? And what is sometimes happens is that assessors blur the distinction between not doing something against good practice and not doing something against the standards. And of course, if you blur that distinction, that means your assessor may come up with a whole load of things that you should do, which are linked to best practice, when actually in terms of the standards, you're fine. And we talk about these sorts of issues in the webinar in a lot more detail. In terms of who to choose for an external quality assessment and managing stakeholders, I walk you through this high-level framework for thinking about the EQA, and we go into depth and we discuss typically war stories and experiences in the webinar of how this can work. So I'm not going to go through that other than to say you'll have a very clear structure what to expect when you go on the course. And obviously, if you were to do the 2-day course with me, we go through this from the assessor's point of view as well and explain how that works. The stakeholder management piece would be from the head of internal audit to their CEO, CFO, and audit committee. But the stakeholder management from the external assessor point of view might also be in relation to who's really the sponsor of this. Are private meetings wanted? Are agendas in mind? And I'll talk you through some of the experiences. Again, people who haven't done this much sometimes underestimate the off-the-record stuff that happens during an EQA and a QAR. And I can talk to you about that and get you a bit more prepared for what might happen. I've been on a number of occasions in private meetings with audit committee members who've said, should we keep the head of internal audit? And I can talk to you more about that kind of side of it if you join the webinar. When it comes to the assessment course, which is 2 days, one of the key messages I emphasize is don't be one of those assessors who just irritates the head of internal audit. And we say in English, scores points, but doesn't really add value. One of the things that I will explain, and I'll give many examples of this, is how to take shortcomings, either in terms of the standards or best practices, but really start to link the weak points, perhaps through file review, to criteria, but also stakeholder feedback. And I think it's really important, if you're going to get real insight and value from the external quality process, that you learn how to stop doing the stupid little points and start doing the more interesting points, which hopefully will be less burdensome to the head of internal audit and much more interesting to all stakeholders concerned. And equally, one of the other things is to help you get much clearer about what kind of actions can be prioritized, what sorts of solutions might you propose. And then, as I said, on the 2-day course, which is all about learning to be an assessor, we get into the detail of this. How do you determine the difference between generally conforms, partially conforms, and does not conform? I mean, you can read the words, but what we try to do is look at specific examples so you can get real confidence on how to do that. And again, this is something which in some countries, having this competence to the international standards of being an EQA, QAR assessor is really useful, so that you can have a lot of confidence when you're assessing somebody else. Equally, for big audit teams who really want to get to the next level, actually getting to the EQA assessor level can really prepare you when you're being reviewed by an assessor yourself, because you'll know the same things and that they've been taught as well. So although it's preparing for an EQA assessment and being an EQA assessor, my view would be, if you're a big team, the 2-day course will give you a lot more tools and tips and guidance if you're having quite a detailed assessment. Clearly, in the 2-day course, we actually go into the IIA standards in a bit more detail, and I've got tools and techniques to, as I said, drill into some of these and talk about what does good look like and where can there be problem areas. And, you know, one of my overarching messages will be, if you're looking at this diagram now saying, oh, that looks interesting and clear, you might want to ask yourself after seeing this video, you know, when's the last time you cross-checked what your audit manual says and what your various reports say and what these IA standards say? And one of the things that I think people get from doing these courses is they really learn to show more simply how they're living and breathing by the IA standards. And that means normally the EQA assessment process is very smooth. That's what you get from doing this kind of course. So for more information, you can go online shortly and see the IA Netherlands courses. There's either the one-day course on the 4th of November in the afternoon and the 5th of November in the morning, or there's the all-day course, which starts before the first course and ends after the one-day course, which is for the reviewer. So the link to that is there. There are videos on a YouTube channel that I've done. There's also other materials on my website, www.risk.ai.co.uk, and that includes other courses for the Institute of Auditors in the Netherlands, the UK, Belgium, Sweden, Finland, and elsewhere. And if you're not sure, you'd like a little bit more information, feel free to either contact one of the Institutes of Internal Audit or send me an email, info@riskai.co.uk. I hope that's been helpful, and I hope to see you on one of those courses or another one in the future. Thanks very much for watching.